You're listening to the Elvis Ultimate Fan Channel podcast, the channel that is devoted 100% to the life and career of the biggest selling recording artist of all time, with your host, Steve Francis.
Hello and welcome to this episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel. Cleveland disc jockey Bill Randle introduced Elvis Presley on his national television debut on the Dorsey Brothers program, Stage Show, Saturday night, January 28th, 1956. I'm joined on the line now by Roger Hall, who is a music preservationist and a 1960s songwriter and drew his inspiration from Elvis songs. He witnessed Elvis's first television appearance and later worked with Bill, who told him stories about Elvis and his manager Tom Parker. Hi Roger, and thanks for joining me on the show today.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Now, I mentioned in my introduction about Cleveland disc jockey Bill Randle, and he introduced Elvis on the Dorsey Brothers program. Just tell me a little bit about the background to that and so forth, and what led up to that.
Well, as far as I can recall, that was a number of years ago, back in the 70s, when I talked to him. He told me that he was very impressed with Elvis when he first saw him in 55. When he came to Cleveland, I think it was February of 55, he did a show in Cleveland called the Hillbilly Jamboree that was put on by another DJ, Tommy Edwards, who was on the same station with Bill Randle. And he heard Elvis at that particular show, and he was very impressed. And he actually talked to Elvis after the show, and he felt that he was an up-and-coming star in the making. And so he said that I'm going to make a film short in the coming months, and I'd like you to be on it. And that's how it started, by bringing it up to Elvis when that was the first time I think he performed in the North, so-called, north from the South, in 55, February 55. First show he did outside of the southern states in the U.S. So it was kind of significant. But the fact that Bill Randle was there, and he was a very prominent DJ. He was called the top jock in the USA by a magazine here in the States. So he was very influential, not just in Cleveland, but in that whole region, wherever that radio station carried to. He was very influential, and he really promoted a lot of the people he admired. He didn't have to necessarily work for a record company or anything. He did it on his own. And Elvis was one of those people that impressed him. So he was able to he had made some other film shorts from what I read. He didn't tell me this, but I read it, about some other popular singers. This wasn't the first one he did. But this one, of course, was really special because you had people like Bill Haley and the Comets, you had Pat Boone, the Ford Lads. These were all people that had hit songs at that time in the 50s. And Elvis was not that well known in the northern states, outside of the South. So it was somewhat of a risk to put Elvis on. And one of the things he told me is the director of that film short, his name was Arthur Cohen, didn't really like the Elvis performance when he saw it. He didn't want to put him in the film. And so Bill hired a cameraman on his own to film the Elvis footage. He sang 5 songs, and he actually owned that film. It was not owned by the studio. The studio was going to release it. It was Universal Pictures. But Bill actually owned that footage. And so that's one of the reasons why I've read that they couldn't find any records of it in the film library of Universal.
Now, just to emphasize that this was actually in October 1955. This was obviously before Elvis' debut on the TV show.
Right.
And the title was The Pied Piper of Cleveland.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's the title he came up with. It was also called Top Jock. I think that was an early title. But that was all Bill Randle's doing. I mean, he was a real mover and shaker, you might say. He really was very much up on what was going on in the music business at that time. And he really could sense that Elvis had a lot of potential. So he really wanted to be sure that he was in this film short. And the film short, it wouldn't have been that long, maybe 15 minutes. And you think all those acts, it wouldn't have been much of anything, maybe one song from each artist.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted to be sure that Elvis was part of that, because he really felt that he was an up-and-coming young singer. So he wanted to be sure that he was in on that. And he was also, Elvis happened to be in Cleveland, too. He was there, I think, for a show, for the Hillbilly Jamboree, maybe. He was there for that. Because Tommy Edwards was also in this film short. There's some pictures out there on the internet some people may have seen of Bill and Tommy Edwards and Elvis and his guys there at the time of the filming in 55. October 20th was actually when the show took place in 55. Now, some people have said, well, did that really take place? Was it really happen? Yes, it definitely did, because there are pictures of it, and they're not stage pictures. And he told me very emphatically that it was definitely filmed, and that he had the footage. This was around 74, 75 when I talked to him.
Uh-huh.
He said there was definitely the film, and he had it in a vault. He was waiting for a time when he could release it and it would have the most impact. And I can tell you how it got sold if you want to know that.
Yes, please. Yeah, I'd be very, very interested. I'm sure our listeners would be as well, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, many years later, it was in around 1992, I believe it was, there was a guy named Ray Santilli, who is a London-based Italian musician and film producer. He approached Bill, and he wanted to buy this footage. And after a lot of haggling back and forth, Bill agreed to sell it to Ray Santilli, who then turned around and sold it to Polygram, which was a British company. I don't think they exist anymore. But he sold it to them for $2 million. This is according to an article I read. And then it disappeared. And nobody knows what happened after that happened. Bill said that he definitely sold it to this guy, but he didn't claim it was for $1 million or $2 million. He said that was a lot of baloney. So my guess is that he sold it for less than that. But in any case, Ray Santilli, who is still alive, I believe, in London, living in London, he had the footage and nothing happened with it. I think he probably tried to get it released, or the Polygram maybe tried to get it released. And the story was, well, maybe because Colonel Tom, in his way of squeezing money out of people, wanted a huge royalty on it. But I think if you pay $2 million for a film short, you're not going to quibble over, say, $50,000 even, which is a lot of money then. You're going to pay it because, with Elvis being, in this peak of his stardom there in this 56 and later, of course, by the 90s, he was a huge star. So I don't believe that was the case, that Colonel Tom put a nix on it. Although Colonel Tom did want to promote Elvis and he wanted him to have his contract with RCA, he really felt that he had, a gold mine. He knew he had a gold mine. And Bill even said that about Colonel Tom. He said he was, he's a fast buck carnival barker, and he knew what he had, and he wrote it to success.
Yes, but now just for anybody that's you mentioned Ray Santilli there a couple of times. For anybody that's thinking, I know that name, where have I heard that name before? He was connected with the alien autopsy footage, right, wasn't he? That's since been shown to be fake.
That's right. Yes, that's right. It's the same person, right? And I think he's released a couple of Elvis videos. I looked online. I saw there was a couple of titles, but I doubt that it's that footage. If it was, he would have certainly promoted it. So I don't know what happened to that footage. Nobody seems to know. And there's also the possibility the footage wasn't that good.
Yeah.
That's the thing that people don't realize. That this was done by a cameraman, probably in a rush job, and maybe it was out of focus or something like that, and maybe the audio wasn't very good. So people who been aching to see this footage, they may be disappointed if it's ever found.
But almost any unseen footage now of Elvis is priceless, especially for fans like myself.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Now, can we just say the memories of the people that were there that day of Elvis? Apparently, a lot of people said that he was painfully shy and he was petrified with fear.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's. I think Pat Boone said that. Yeah, yeah. I think well, because he was probably painfully shy. The thing that's interesting about that is that he may have been very shy when he talked to people, but when he got on stage, he became what I call electric. I call him Electric Elvis
Yes, yes.
because, especially in 55, 56, around that time, when he was really, breaking out, he just came alive when he got on stage. Because I watched that first national TV appearance in 56 when I was just a teenager. And I was really impressed with, how he carried himself when he sang those songs. It really got to me. I mean, I was sort of interested in the music anyway, in rock and roll. But, I could see that he was different, that, he was, as I say, electric. I mean, he just lit up the camera basically when he was on stage. And that was proven with the other television appearances he made. That's really, I believe, how he became such a national sensation. It was from television as well as from the records that he made in 56 especially. Because before that, with Sun Records, he had obviously some hits with Sun, but it was really when he got to RCA, and they promoted him heavily, of course, with the TV shows.
Yeah, I mean, you can see his confidence growing through the television shows. When you see the first one on January the 28th, he can barely wait to sing the songs and then get off. And then you can just see him growing through the shows, and then the Milton Berle shows and the Steve Allen shows. But of course, the Steve Allen show it's a very touchy subject with a lot of fans because of the way Steve treated him.
Right. Yes, I agree. I felt the same way. They really sort of made fun of him. I mean, they portrayed him as kind of a country bumpkin. Yeah. He sang, hound dog to a real hound dog.
Yeah.
And he hated that. I don't blame him for hating it. I didn't like it either. I thought that was really poor, what Steve Allen did. And then he put him in a country comedy routine. They just sort of treated him as a joke.
Yes.
And I think those of us who were fans of Elvis really didn't like that at all.
We have on record actually what he was wearing that day during the filming. He was wearing a red sports jacket and white suede shoes. So even if he was sort of painfully shy, he wasn't shy about his clothes, that's for sure.
No, that's true. He was a flashy dresser. And Bill told me something about that. He said that even though he was very shy, he liked to dress up in flashy clothes, and his hair was kind of greasy, and he looked kind of dangerous, actually.
Yeah.
And the girls loved that. The young girls, they just couldn't get enough of that. That look, that dangerous look, because, it's a time of James Dean in movies and Marlon Brando, those kind of tough guys. And Elvis sort of, I think he picked up on that, because he liked both James Dean and Marlon Brando movies.
So that filming has now become the holy grail of Elvis's career, really, hasn't it? And if it ever turns up, it will probably be a sight to behold. Although, like you say, the quality might not be as good as we were hoped for. That's
true. Yeah. It's one of those great mysteries. There's a fellow, Chris Kennedy, who wrote a very good book on Tommy Edwards, a wonderful book with color pictures, including pictures from that film date in October '55. And he sort of thinks that he's looking for it. He said he's come damn close a few times, but I haven't heard anything from him recently, so I don't know if he's still on the trail. But it would take somebody doing a lot of detective work, and you'd have to be traveling quite extensively, especially like to London or maybe out to Hollywood even,
yes,
to find out what might be possible to find, if anything.
So the next time then Bill came into contact with Elvis was obviously on the Saturday night, January 28th, 1956. Just tell us a little bit about that. He was called on to introduce Elvis, wasn't he?
Yeah, he did, because he had a radio show in New York at that time. He not only had the Cleveland radio show, but he also had a radio show in New York. I think it was on a Saturday night. And so he was in town anyway, and he knew a lot of the people on TV. That was CBS. It was actually the Jackie Gleason show. It was an hour show, I believe, and the first half hour was Jackie Gleason comedy show called The Honeymooners. And I think the second half was with the Dorsey Brothers called Stage Show.
Mm-hmm.
And Bill probably knew the Dorsey Brothers. I wouldn't be surprised because he knew a lot of the well-known musicians at that time. So he was a natural person to call in to introduce Elvis, but he did make a point of mentioning that film short.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present one of the radio's most listened to disc jockeys, Bill Randle. William?
We'd like at this time to introduce you to a young fellow who, like many performers, Johnny Ray among them, come up out of nowhere to be overnight very big stars. This young fellow we saw for the first time while making a movie short. We think tonight that he's going to make television history for you. We'd like you to meet him now, Elvis Presley, and here he is.
As people know, if they've seen that footage, that he said, I met Elvis when we were making a movie short. So, I mean, that obviously proves he wouldn't be saying that on national TV if it didn't happen.
Exactly.
So it definitely happened. But I think, Bill was happy to introduce Elvis because he was such a fan, and he really tried to promote him. He actually got Elvis an audition before that telecast on the Arthur Godfrey Talent Scout show, which was a popular TV show. But Elvis didn't make it because he was ill-prepared. He came in and he wasn't dressed very well, and he kind of stumbled through his numbers, and they didn't accept him. So, he had his chance earlier on, but he didn't make it. But this time, I don't know if he just felt that he had to really perform well, or he was still nervous, as you mentioned. When he was on, you could tell he was kind of jittery in his performance.
Yeah.
But what got me was that he was so dynamic in his singing, how he sang the songs. And he sang Shake, Rattle, and Roll.
Yeah, well, this is what I was just about to say that. Now, a couple of weeks before this broadcast, he recorded Heartbreak Hotel. It was going to be released as a single with the B-side I Was the One, but he didn't choose to sing that on the show.
Well, I can tell you why. Because the RCA didn't want him to do it. They wanted to have a build-up of that song. They didn't want it to be introduced on the first telecast. It was only, a few weeks later. They were nervous about him. They weren't sure he was going to make it. Just because he was popular in the southern area and maybe even in Cleveland, they weren't sure that he was, he was the type of person that they could be successful with, because he was still relatively unknown in the country. And so they wanted to be sure that he was seen on TV for a few weeks before he did Heartbreak Hotel. Now, Colonel Tom loved Heartbreak Hotel, and I think he probably wanted Elvis to do it on that first telecast, but the RCA people who had the contract said no. So I think that's the reason that he didn't sing it on that first telecast.
He didn't sing it until February the 11th, which is a whole month and a day after he first recorded it.
That's right. But I think the song had been released, so it was becoming popular. And by the time he sang it on February 11th, I think a lot of people had heard the recording of it. I know I bought a copy. I don't remember when I bought it, but I bought it that year. So, I mean, it wasn't like, it came out of nowhere. I mean, the record was out, and it was starting to climb the charts probably at that time. So, RCA was kind of shrewd in a way that they did that. They kind of held it back until he's better known. By February, he had been on a few times. And those people who watched that show, the Jackie Gleason part of the show was very popular. It was one of the most popular Saturday night shows at that time. So, and the stage show was kind of a fill-in. Jackie Gleason was funny because he sometimes he wanted to go out and play golf rather than be on TV. So he would change the format of his show. He would sometimes have just his show on, but then sometimes he would have the guest people coming on and filling in. And that's what happened with the Dorsey Brothers stage show. Of course, they were big band musicians, and I'm not sure they loved Elvis. I think they sort of put up with him in a sense. And they sort of pretended in a way that, here comes Elvis again. Try to be positive because that's what they had to do. But I'm not sure they were crazy about his music.
Now, I think a lot of people saw him at that time as a curiosity
Yeah.
and a flash in the pan.
Yeah, right. I think that's true. And certainly a lot of people in the press felt that way and wrote negative comments about him, of course, all through that time, about his performances on TV, especially, which had some impact on the older generation, probably maybe the parents, but not the young people. The young people sort of rebelled against those negative comments about Elvis and how he gyrated. And that term Elvis the pelvis, which he hated, and I don't blame him because
Yes.
it's a derogatory term.
Yes.
That is something that the press, picked up and used to sort of make fun of him in a sense. A lot of negative stuff that was going on about Elvis in those days.
And as time went on, people wanted to learn more and more about him. And there's a lovely quote from Dixie Locke, his then girlfriend, about his what he would like to eat. She says he ate 8 deluxe cheeseburgers, 2 bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches, and topped it off with 3 chocolate milkshakes.
Yeah, but you know what I also read about that after, I don't know if she said it or somebody else said it, said, well, Elvis was a growing boy. And it's true, he had quite an appetite for food as well as for music. I think he was basically hungry for whatever he could consume, including all that food you mentioned. He had quite an appetite.
Did Bill Randle tell you any stories about Elvis and the Colonel when you were with him in the 70s?
Not really. What he kept telling me is that Colonel Tom, as he called him, was quite a fast buck person who, was out for money. In fact, there's a quote I saw somewhere that Colonel Tom told Elvis, "We do not socialize. Our great interest is money."
Wow.
That's what he told. So, there's a lot of stories about Colonel Tom, and, Alana Nash in her great book on the Colonel, she gives a wonderful evaluation of him. But I think Bill was sort of amused by him somewhat, but also a little bit put off by him because he was so insistent on, taking over, which he did. Because at the time that film was done in '55, Colonel Tom was just showing the interest in Elvis and writing around to different people to find out, how he could, become his manager. And then he got the agreement from Elvis's parents, Gladys and Vernon Presley. So around that time, I think it was in '55 or maybe '56, Colonel Tom was, he was just out to get Elvis. And Bill, who was at one time asked by Elvis to be his manager, Elvis was impressed with Bill Randle, and he asked him straight out if he would be his manager. And Bill told him, no, I don't want to go on the road and go through all of that hassle. So he turned him down. But he might have been his manager if he agreed to it.
Yeah.
And it might have been a lot different. I don't know what would have happened. But he just said that he didn't want to get involved in that. He wanted to stay in Cleveland. He was happy with his radio show. And he was making a lot of money, too. I don't know from what. Could be from kickbacks or who knows what, because there was a lot of things going on at that time with, money being transferred around. So he was doing quite well on the radio. And he had a good contract with the radio station, too. They gave him a good contract because I think he was most popular DJ on that station, WERE in Cleveland.
Okay. So we've started off in 1956 with the debut television appearance, and Elvis finished the year filming his first movie, Love Me Tender. Now, you've got a little bit of information about the songwriting and recording of the song Love Me Tender, haven't you?
Right. Yeah, that's on my site. Early Elvis is a website that people can look up. But I can just tell you briefly, a lot of people have said that was written by Elvis. No, it's a big lie. Elvis had nothing to do with it. In fact, I think he even said he never wrote any songs. And it was credited also to Vera Mattson. Now, the story is, and I got this right from the man who wrote it. It was written by Ken Darby, who was a songwriter and arranger for, I think he worked at 20th Century Fox Studios. And he wrote the song. It's based on a Civil War song, Aura Lee, and he rearranged it and added his own words. He also wrote all the other songs, the other 3 songs in the film. So he wrote all the songs. But the thing is, here's Colonel Tom again taking over. He insisted that Elvis' name be on, get credit for writing the song. And this is something that bothers a lot of people, that, a lot of times these songwriters don't get the proper credit. However, Ken Darby said, even though he didn't get the credit, he didn't really want the credit at that time. He thought Elvis was not going to last. He thought he would just disappear after he made that movie. So he didn't care. But he also turned out that he made a lot of money in the end, because his wife, who was the co-writer, got the royalties from that record, and it helped him to buy a wonderful yacht. They bought a yacht from the royalties of Love Me Tender, that record. So he didn't feel too bad about it, because he made out pretty well from the royalties from it. But he is the one who should be credited, Ken Darby, as the songwriter for all those songs in Love Me Tender. And of course, Elvis liked Love Me Tender. He didn't care much for the other 3 songs. But I kind of think they're nice songs. They're obviously not fit the movie very well, but it doesn't matter. And I actually played one of them on a tribute I did to Elvis. I had a radio show called In the Mood, which was mostly big band music, but I also played songs of the 50s. And on August 16th, I think that's the day he died, in 1993, I played Poor Boy, which is from one of the songs from that movie, as sort of a tribute to Elvis, who started as a poor boy. To me, that's a wonderful story of somebody who made good from being very poor to being obviously very rich and famous, who always seemed to have a sense of where he came from. He had good values. That's one of the things that impressed me about him. He was a fan of gospel music. That was his favorite music, which I also like a lot. I think that's some of his best recordings, the gospel ones. So he really, I think he epitomized good qualities. Unfortunately, the press continued to run him down all the time, make fun of him or criticize him, call him Elvis the Pelvis. But I think that in Love Me Tender, he wanted to be an actor, of course. He wanted to be in a straight dramatic role. He didn't even want to sing in his films. But unfortunately, Colonel Tom, supposedly, they got him into these terrible musicals in the 60s, which some are better than others, of course. But basically, I think Elvis got so tired of those musicals he had to make in the 60s that he didn't want any more part of it by the end of the 60s. But Love Me Tender, he thought, was the beginning of his acting career. And then when he made, Jailhouse Rock, and Loving You, and especially King Creole, which I think is his best acting performance, he really was thinking that he would become an actor. Especially, he admired James Dean a great deal, that he would be like James Dean. He would be known for his acting as well as his singing. That's at least what I have read. So he was looking forward to an acting career when he made Love Me Tender as much as the singing.
Well, yes, it's quite correct what you say. When Love Me Tender first started, Elvis didn't even realize he was going to be asked to sing, and they actually worked in some of the songs. He actually told his girlfriend at the time, June Juanico, that they'd asked him to sing some songs, and he was unhappy about it.
Right. Yes, that's true. And his group wasn't with him. He didn't have Scotty Moore and Bill Black. They had a studio group. I think it was Ken Darby's group that he brought in.
Yes, 20th Century Fox didn't want to take a chance on Bill and Scotty. So,
right.
Yeah.
That's right. But he did have him, I think, in the next one. Loving You, I think, was the next film he made.
Yeah, I think they were in that. Yeah, and
they were in that, and his mother was in that too.
Yes, that's right, and they were in Jailhouse Rock and King Creole. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that was Elvis again. By that time, he had the power to to dictate what he wanted, and they would listen to him. But when he made Love Me Tender, he didn't quite have that much power over the studio that he had later on.
No.
But he definitely wanted to be an actor. I mean, he loved the young actors like James Dean and Marlon Brando, those people, and he wanted to be like them.
It was the only film that showed Elvis dying in as well, and they kind of rewrote the ending and showed Elvis in lap dissolve singing over the end credits, didn't they?
That's true, yeah.
They hint at him dying in Flaming Star, but they don't actually show him dying. They just show him sort of riding off into the sunset.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Yes. Well, of course, by then they couldn't dare say Elvis died anywhere.
Correct.
But even in Love Me Tender, because he was really a big star by the time that film came out, they just felt that the audience, the young people, wouldn't accept it, especially the girls. Wouldn't accept, and his mother, of course, cried when she saw that, and I think that had an impact on him too. He was very close to his mother, as you know, so she was quite upset that that ending happened that way. But you're right that they put that sort of dissolve in at the end where he sang to sort of imply that somehow he lived on. So they wanted it to not be too downbeat with an ending.
There was a very, actually, I forgot about this till now. There's a very interesting audio file you sent me of Bill reading out letters sent to Elvis on his show.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, well, let's listen to that now.
Really like Elvis Presley. And I forgot to remember to forget, says that's my favorite record. Likes Tutti Frutti, too. That comes up in about 15 minutes. Here's a letter from Phyllis Wish, W-I-S-C-H, from Shaker Junior High School. She's in the 7th grade. Says, this Friday's our Christmas dance. My favorite record's Angels in the Sky. Says, I don't see why all the girls go for Elvis Presley. I don't think he's so hot. Then I have a letter here, and this is a real Steve Allen type letter. When Steve gets those letters and they pound and the band hollers with him. This is a real mad letter, and it's from Judy Carson out there. She says, in regards to the letter you read in the air yesterday about Elvis Presley, I think that person is absolutely crazy, underlined, 1 exclamation point. Me and every single one of my friends, both boys and girls, think that Elvis Presley is the greatest ever. 3 exclamation points and underlined 3 times. Because when I heard you read that yesterday, I could have chewed nails. And she has a few rather blunt opinions about the people who don't like Elvis Presley. And then she goes on to say that if they don't like him, they can keep their crummy opinions to themselves. We don't have the band hollering in the background here. Says, as far as bringing Elvis back to Cleveland, I, for one, and hundreds of others will be there to see him at any time, any place, and under any circumstances. And she goes on to say, I love Elvis Presley. Wow, 3 exclamation points. The whole general idea is that she digs Elvis the most. For all of the people in Cleveland who have made Elvis overnight one of the really gigantic stars in this particular area, here he is. He's destined to be the big new star of 1956, Elvis Presley. And Scotty and Bill, and I forgot to remember to forget.
And it's very interesting to hear somebody actually saying they thought Elvis wasn't that hot.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the audience at that time, because he was still so new that there were some young people, some of the young girls especially, who were fans of other singers, and I don't know who there was. I mean, they probably had some favorite singer that was popular then. There were a lot of pop singers around at that time. Like Eddie Fisher was one, I think, a young one, and Pat Boone, of course, was coming on strong. And, of course, Pat Boone was so different from Elvis, even though Pat Boone came from Tennessee. I think he sort of admired Elvis a little bit, even though he was so shy when he met him. He said when he went on stage in that 55 film footage that he was impressed with how dynamic he was. And one thing that should be mentioned is this is written up in some of the write-ups about that film, is that when Elvis, I think he did a repeat show. He did 2 shows that day, 55. And the repeat show, he broke a string on his guitar, and he got so mad he smashed the guitar on the stage.
Wow.
And the audience went wild. And they had to clear the place out. I mean, it was like a riot, because he just spontaneously smashed the guitar on the stage. And nobody expected that kind of thing to happen then. So that was quite a sensation. And the other thing, too, is that there were a lot of girl fans of Pat Boone. Pat Boone was very popular then. So, they had to be very careful. They had to have a lot of protection from the audience, the females in the audience especially, because they were crazy for Pat Boone as much as for Elvis. But after he smashed that guitar, I mean, people just went crazy. It was like he opened up a door and everybody rushed out. It was just incredible. And his clothes got ripped and everything. It was quite a scene. And back in '55, that was not something very common. That became more common later on.
Yeah, I was going to say, bands like The Who and those sort of rock bands would do that in the 70s. They'd smash up the guitars and the amplifiers and everything. But I mean, Elvis had done that 20 years earlier.
Right, that's right, yeah. And it was spontaneous. I don't think it was any, setup or anything. He just was mad,
Yeah.
And he just lost it and smashed the guitar. That was it. And that's the thing about him, I think, at that time especially. He was very spontaneous. It wasn't like he was studied or rehearsed or, told what to do. And even throughout his career, I think he was more or less an independent person. He did what he wanted to do. And, of course, when he became popular, he was allowed to do what he wanted to do. But back then, he didn't have as much freedom. But still, he always, I think, tended to be thinking independently of what he was doing. In his performances, especially, not so much outside of that. He was electric, as I say, because he worked for an electric company too.
Yeah, Crown Electric.
Right, yeah. But that's just another side to it. But I just feel that he sort of lit up the stage. That's why I say electric, because when he came on, he sort of moseyed out. The first time he came out in '56. He sort of waltzed out there, but he was like, as I think Peter Gralnick said, he was like shot out of a cannon. That's a good description.
Yeah.
He was like, ready to go. I mean, he was primed to get out there and do his thing. And then he got off quick. He did, at that time, he was kind of shy on stage. And of course, as you say, over that year, he became more comfortable with being on camera.
He was called the atomic-powered singer in 1956, wasn't he? On some billboards.
Yeah, I know there were all kinds of names that they had for him. He was before he became popular. He was called the Hillbilly Cat.
Yeah.
And I think there was another name they had for him in the South, especially. So he had and of course the Elvis of Pelvis, which he didn't want anybody to use, but they did. But he was, as he said, he was just a singer, and he was a singer who assimilated both the blues tradition and the country tradition. And that's why, and as a white singer, he was really, he's bringing them both together. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. Not that he was the only one, but he was the one who probably made it most important. Merging the black and the white traditions together, basically. I think that's his greatest asset, and that includes even with the gospel music. It's mostly white gospel, but he had his backup singers. Were black and white both singing. So I mean, he had no prejudice against that, and I think that's a credit to him also.
Okay, so all the information that we've discussed this evening, where can people go to read up about that?
Well, I have a couple of computer discs. I don't know if people are interested in. I have one that's strictly about Elvis and Bill Randle. It's called Shake, Rattle, and Roll. And the other one is about Bill Randle's career, not just about Elvis, but about the Shakers and on the other things that he was involved in. It's called the Bill Randle Chronicles. And they're both available on my website, which is AmericanMusicPreservation.com. Or if you look up early Elvis on Google or whatever search engine you use, you can probably find it that way. But on the early Elvis page, there is a description of those computer discs, CD-ROMs they are, but also a lot about Elvis's his early career. This is called early Elvis, mainly the 50s and early 60s, including a song that maybe some of the fans, I don't know if it would be a favorite of theirs or not. It's Now or Never. which I've read was the favorite song of Elvis. And I think it's his greatest recording, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a terrific recording from 1960. So there's some information about that song, and as well as his gospel music and about his early hit songs. For example, in the first 2 years of his success, he had 10 number one songs. I don't know if anybody has equaled that, maybe the Beatles, but 10 in 2 years, that's a pretty phenomenal record, I think, for any singer. So, I mean, if people want to check it out, I would say to look at the early Elvis page on AmericanMusicPreservation.com, and they can get some information on that, or they can order the discs if they want.
Well, I'll include the link in the comment section of this podcast and YouTube video. So if people want to just click on that, they'll go straight to that.
Also, I could say that if people want to know more about that film, that is the Holy Grail, I would say that somebody should try to contact the people who were involved. Now, some of the people who were in that film, I think there's only one or two of them left. Some of the crew cuts, that group that played with Bill Haley, are still alive, I think. They may still be performing. And the other one was Patricia Wright, who was a young singer back then. I think she lives in Canada. To talk to them and ask them what they remember about that film, because they may have some things to add. I mean, they've been asked, I suppose, by people over the years, but if somebody wanted to do a research project, I think that would be a good one, and certainly try to find if that film exists. I think it would be very hard to find it at this point, that footage. I just think it either disappeared, disintegrated, turned to dust, or it may be lying somewhere on a shelf in a mislabeled film can. That's the other possibility, I think.
Yes, that's right, yeah. I might even take up the job myself to do a little bit of research on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Polygram, I don't know the story on that company, but it was a British company, and I think either went out of business or got bought off by somebody. And so the records may still be in London or wherever they keep them. That might be a place to check to see if there might be anything there, any films that can be checked. They may still have a film library somewhere. That's the best hope, I would say, of finding this lost footage, that it might be in some film can somewhere that's not labeled properly. That would be my guess.
A few months ago, there was a little sliver of film discovered of Elvis and Johnny Cash. Did you see that? So, it's not beyond belief that this could still turn up. The Pied Piper of Cleveland could still turn up.
That's true. And it would be great if it did, even if it's not great quality. I think the fans would love to see it, because that's really the first filmed performance. I mean, he had some, home movies that were done when he was performing in Memphis area. Yeah. Which are kind of, crude. They're fun to watch, but this was an actual performance, a concert. So it's different. And I don't know what happened to the other footage. I mean, from what I understand from Bill, it was kind of hard to get from him whether he just did the Elvis portion or he did the whole, the other people as well, because there should be footage of the other people that were in that as well. So you'd have Bill Haley in the Comets and Pat Boone and Four Lads and Patricia Wright. But I don't know if the film exists. I would think it would be all of them, because they filmed them all. They all did their numbers. So what I had read, that when Rain Santilli bought the footage, it was very short. And I think it was only Elvis that Bill Randle sold him. So it may not have been the whole film. But of course, Ray Santilli was mainly interested in the Elvis footage, I would think, and not the others. But the others would be fun to see too. Bill Haley, he was a big star then.
Yes, it would be very interesting. Another thing that's just struck me as well is Elvis did a picture test for the Rainmaker, and that we've only seen still photographs from that as well, haven't we?
Right. Yeah.
A screen test for
Screen test. Yeah.
and again, you would have thought that would have been filmed.
Yeah. Well, there again, it could be, in some film can somewhere in Hollywood, if that's where it was done. And the thing is that you need somebody who really is good at digging this stuff up, because it's not easy to find. This Chris Kennedy I mentioned before, he did some research, he said, on Bill Randle and on Elvis, and trying to find that Holy Grail film. And he had a hard time finding anything, because it's not something that's going to just pop out at you. You've got to really do a lot of digging and looking around and asking people. And, it's so long after it happened that, it's harder to get, find out where the leads may bring you. You can't just go one place and think, well, that's it. You got to check a lot of places and talk to different people. But there aren't many people left who were, around at that time or involved in that. I mentioned a few of the musicians that might still be alive. Scotty Moore, I should mention the Scotty Moore website has a nice description of that 55 show that he's no longer alive, of course, but somebody did for him on his website, scottymore.com, I guess it is, a nice description of that film in 55 with some pictures too, including the high school where it was done, Brooklyn High School in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So people can check that out also. There's a lot of information online as well, and people can check that way. That's one way to communicate to people these days is online to find out something. You may even talk to Ray Santilli, although I'd be very careful if you spoke with him. I'm not sure what information you'd get that would be accurate. But he's the one who bought the film, after all.
Yeah.
And Bill Randle said he confirmed that, so it's not, it's not a myth. But what he did with it, that's the question. Whether he still has it. I mean, is it possible that he may still have it in his collection somewhere? I tend to doubt it, but it's very mysterious.
If he does, what is he waiting for? That's
right,
what I want to
exactly.
know. Ray, what are you waiting for?
And from what I read about him, he wouldn't have waited very long.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, he sold it right away. I mean, he bought it, I think that in the article it said for $1.9 million. He sold it to Polygram for $2.2 million.
Wow.
So he made a profit right away.
Yeah.
If that's accurate, I don't know if that figure is accurate, but that's what it said. I don't think Bill Randle agreed with that figure, but who knows what it was. A lot of money anyway, I'm sure. I don't think Bill would have sold it, for a small amount of money. I sort of felt when I talked to him, I might add, that he was sitting on this too long. Even in the 70s when I was talking to him, there still would have been a tremendous interest in that film if he had convinced a movie studio or somebody else to release it. And he just wouldn't do it. I think he just thought he had a gold mine. He was going to wait, and it's going to just increase in value. And I just felt that he was, he's missing the point. That this was a time in the 70s. There was a lot of revivals of 50s music. I remember the different shows that with all the rock groups, that came out. Even Bill Haley came back into popularity.
Yes. Because
he had disappeared basically in the 60s.
Well, Roger, it's been fascinating talking to you about Elvis and the movie short and all the peripheral things we discussed as well. And I just hope that this maybe somewhere, somehow, this piece of film surfaces in the not too distant future.
Well, I would hope so too. I would love to see it myself. I would hope that somebody will find it in the future. But in the meantime, I would say that Bill Randle hopefully will get more attention. He really belongs in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, for example. I don't believe he is. He was the Cleveland disc jockey, the #1 disc jockey in the country in the 50s. And yet he's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Alan Freed is there and others. I think Murray the K may be in there. Some of the other DJs are in they're in the Hall of Fame, but he's not. I wrote to the director of that some years ago and asked him, and he agreed with me. He said he should be in here, but he's not the one that decides it. It's decided by a committee of executives, whoever it is, who decides who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is in Cleveland, after all. And that's where Bill Randle, made his success. So
it strikes me as very unfair.
It is unfair, and I just keep hoping that more credit be given to Bill, because I think he deserves it for the work that he did, especially with Elvis's career, his early career. I really think that Elvis did some of his best recordings in the 50s and early 60s. That later on he had a lot of popular songs, but I think he did his best work, in the earlier years of the 50s and early 60s. I don't want to cut it off, by saying, after Blue Hawaii, everything was terrible. Some people feel that way, or Viva Las Vegas, whatever movie you might mention. I don't want to cut off any particular time, because he made good recordings throughout his career, even toward the end. It was just that I think in the early years, especially, he had so much drive. He was electric again. Keep mentioning that word. That is really when he did his most dynamic singing and recording, I believe, those earlier recordings, the Sun recordings, and of course the early RCA recordings. And his ballads, I should mention that I have read, and I agree with Elvis, that his ballads were his favorite kind of music, not the up-tempos, not the jailhouse rock, but the songs like Don't, or Loving You, or Love Me Tender.
Yeah.
He liked those songs more. He liked to sing them more because they were similar to the gospel music that he did, He would devote more time to those sort of songs in his live performances, and he would just rush through the ones like All Shook Up and Hound Dog and all those. Right, that's right. And that just shows you that, he preferred those slow songs more because they're more emotional. That's one reason. He could, he can get into it more. He put more emotion into it because he had a lot of emotion in his singing. So I think that was more important to him than the up-tempo stuff that he did. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Roger, for your time today. And I'm sure our listeners were fascinated to hear all your stories. So thank you very much. Okay, fine. And I hope they'll check out my site if they get a chance. Early Elvis. Okay. Thanks, Roger. Okay, thank you. All the best. Thanks once again to Roger for joining me on the show today. You can contact me by email at elvistheultimatefanchannel@gmail.com and on Facebook and Twitter at elvistheultimatefanchannel. All my podcasts are available on all good podcast providers such as Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Google Podcast, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, to name just a few. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me next time for another episode from Elvis the Ultimate Fan Channel podcast.